The year is 2025, a time when technology and progress have reached unprecedented heights, yet shadows of injustice and inequality still loom large. Nestled in the heart of El Salvador, a colossal concrete monstrosity casts a long, ominous shadow. Its walls are thick, its gates unyielding, and its purpose chillingly clear. This is CECOT, the Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, a maximum security prison originally designed to house the country's most hardened criminals. But its reputation has grown far beyond its original intent. CECOT hides a dark secret, one that stretches far beyond the borders of El Salvador, reaching deep into the heart of the United States. It's a secret that intertwines with global politics, immigration policies, and human rights debates. This is not just a story about a prison, it's a story about power, control, and the lives caught in the crossfire. It's a story about human rights abuses, about injustice, and about the plight of hundreds of individuals, many of whom are completely innocent, trapped in a system that seems to have forgotten about justice, due process, and basic human dignity. It's a story that forces us to question the very foundations of fairness and humanity. This is a story about how 179 out of 238 U.S. deportees with no criminal record ended up in this modern-day dungeon, a place where their voices are silenced and their stories are buried. These deportees are not hardened criminals. They are individuals who once lived ordinary lives, now thrust into extraordinary circumstances. They are fathers, sons, brothers. They are the backbone of families, the pillars of communities, now torn away from their loved ones. They are individuals like you and me, caught in a web of bureaucratic errors, administrative overreach, and a deeply flawed immigration system. A system that often prioritizes numbers over names and policies over people. They are victims of a system that seems more concerned with expediency than with justice. Their stories demand to be heard, their struggles demand to be acknowledged, and their humanity demands to be recognized. CECOT operates under a shroud of secrecy. Its walls, heavily guarded and monitored 24/7, conceal a brutal reality. The prison, with a capacity of 40,000, is divided into 8 oppressive pavilions, each one a microcosm of despair. Inside, hundreds of men are crammed into cramped, suffocating cells, stripped of their dignity and deprived of even the most basic human rights. The stories that trickle out of CECOT paint a horrifying picture. Detainees, many of whom have never even seen the inside of a courtroom, let alone been convicted of a crime, speak of unimaginable brutality. They describe a daily routine designed to dehumanize and break their spirits. Imagine being locked up for 23.5 hours a day. Your only glimpse of the outside world a sliver of sky visible through the bars of your cell. Imagine being denied access to lawyers, family visits, even phone calls. This is the reality for those imprisoned within CECOT's walls. What makes the story of CECOT even more disturbing is not just the inhumane conditions within its walls, but the broader implications of its existence. The role of the United States government in this human rights crisis cannot be ignored, as it raises serious questions about accountability and ethics. In a move that has drawn condemnation from human rights groups worldwide, the U.S. has chosen to prioritize political expediency over moral responsibility. By entering into a $6 million deal with El Salvador, the U.S. has effectively outsourced its responsibility to uphold basic human rights, a decision that has far-reaching consequences. This deal allows the U.S. to deport individuals to El Salvador, often without thorough investigations or fair hearings. Many of these deportations are based on flimsy evidence, dubious gang affiliations, or even something as superficial as misinterpreted tattoos, leaving lives shattered in the process. These deportees are then sent to CECOT, a facility notorious for its overcrowding and lack of basic human rights protections. Inside, they face horrific conditions, are denied due process, and are often left to languish without hope or recourse. For many, this means disappearing into a legal black hole, where justice is not just delayed but entirely absent. The $6 million price tag attached to this deal is more than just a financial transaction, it is a stark symbol of misplaced priorities. It represents a moral failing, a decision that undermines the very ideals of justice and fairness. This betrayal of the principles of justice and human dignity tarnishes the image of a nation that claims to champion freedom and equality. It's a stark reminder that freedom, for some, comes at a hefty price, a price that is measured not in dollars, but in the erosion of human rights. And for those caught in this system, the cost is paid in untold suffering, a burden that no amount of money can justify. Life inside CECOT is a relentless assault on the senses. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, despair, and disease. The constant hum of fluorescent lights on 24 hours a day disrupts any semblance of normalcy. The only sounds that punctuate the oppressive silence are the clanging of cell doors and the muffled sobs of men who have lost all hope. Food is scarce and often inedible. Medical care is virtually non-existent. Basic hygiene is a luxury few can afford. The threat of violence, both from guards and from fellow inmates, is ever present. Detainees speak of being beaten, tortured, and humiliated. They tell stories of solitary confinement in dark, cramped cells, of being denied access to clean water and sanitation. Their testimonies paint a grim picture of a place where human rights are routinely violated, and where hope goes to die. The stories of those unjustly imprisoned within CECOT's walls are, well, truly heartbreaking. Take, for example, the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a United States resident who was deported to El Salvador and imprisoned in CECOT, despite having a valid court order preventing his deportation. Or, consider the case of Jose Franco Caraballo Tiapa, who was deported based solely on his daughter's birth date, which was, unfortunately, misinterpreted as a gang tattoo. These are not isolated incidents. They are emblematic of a system that is, frankly, fundamentally broken, a system that prioritizes expediency over justice, and one that has devastating consequences for real people. These men, and hundreds like them, are not just statistics. They are individuals with families, dreams, and aspirations. They are victims of a system that has failed them at every turn, a system that seems more concerned with demonizing and incarcerating than with rehabilitation and reintegration. The human rights abuses taking place within CECOT's walls have not gone unnoticed. Human rights organizations around the world have condemned the prison's inhumane conditions and the lack of due process afforded to those imprisoned there. Amnesty International has called CECOT a black hole for human rights, while Human Rights Watch has described it as wholly lawless. These organizations have documented thousands of human rights violations within CECOT, including arbitrary detention, torture, and denial of medical care. Their findings paint a damning picture of a prison system that operates with impunity, where human rights are routinely trampled upon. The international community has a moral obligation to speak out against these atrocities. We cannot stand idly by while innocent people are subjected to such horrific treatment. We must demand accountability, transparency, and an end to the human rights abuses taking place within CECOT's walls. The treatment of detainees within CECOT stands in stark contrast to international standards of prisoner treatment, as outlined in the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, also known as the Nelson Mandela Rules. These rules, adopted by the United Nations in 2015, provide a blueprint for humane and dignified treatment of prisoners, emphasizing rehabilitation and reintegration. The Mandela Rules emphasize the importance of access to legal representation, contact with the outside world, and adequate healthcare. They prohibit torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. CECOT, with its overcrowded cells, lack of access to medical care, and widespread reports of abuse, blatantly violates these fundamental principles. The stark contrast between the Mandela Rules and the reality within CECOT underscores the urgent need for reform. The international community must hold El Salvador accountable for its treatment of prisoners and demand that it uphold its obligations under international law. The United States, with its $6 million deal, has chosen to prioritize political convenience over moral responsibility. Through its policy of deporting individuals to El Salvador, it has effectively turned a blind eye to the consequences of its actions. This decision makes the U.S. complicit in the human rights abuses taking place within CECOT, a prison notorious for its inhumane conditions. By outsourcing its responsibility to uphold basic human rights, the U.S. is not just failing to lead by example, but is also tacitly endorsing practices like torture, arbitrary detention, and systemic abuse. These actions contribute to the denial of due process, a cornerstone of justice that should never be compromised. This policy of outsourcing injustice is not only morally reprehensible, but it also undermines the very values the U.S. claims to uphold. It's a short-sighted approach that exacerbates instability and weakens the foundations of justice. By undermining the rule of law, it fuels unrest and creates a breeding ground for further human rights violations. This climate of fear and distrust erodes communities, leaving families and individuals in a state of perpetual uncertainty. It's time for the U.S. to confront its role in perpetuating this crisis and take meaningful action to rectify it. Concrete steps must be taken to address these injustices, starting with an immediate suspension of deportations to El Salvador. The U.S. must ensure that no deportee is sent back to face torture, abuse, or inhumane treatment. Until the human rights situation in El Salvador improves, deportations must remain on hold. The U.S. must also demand guarantees that deportees will not face further harm or violations of their rights. Additionally, the U.S. must leverage its influence to pressure the Salvadoran government to enact meaningful reforms. This includes improving conditions within CECOT and ensuring that detainees are treated with dignity and respect. Every detainee must be afforded due process, a fundamental right that cannot be ignored in the pursuit of justice. The horrors taking place within CECOT's walls must not remain hidden. We cannot allow the voices of those unjustly imprisoned to be silenced. It's time to break the silence and demand justice. We must raise awareness about the plight of those imprisoned in CECOT and the role of the U.S. government in this ongoing human rights crisis. We must contact our elected officials and demand that they take action to end deportations to El Salvador and to hold the Salvadoran government accountable for its abuses. We must support human rights organizations working tirelessly to expose the truth and fight for justice. The fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires sustained effort, unwavering commitment, and a refusal to be silenced. Together, we can be the voice for the voiceless. We can demand accountability, and we can help bring an end to the human rights abuses taking place within CECOT's walls.